perspective, the power of resistance of the Ukrainians is greater at the moment than the power of resistance of a demoralised, mobilised Russian army.
All right, really.
Good evening, John.
Chip, always welcome. Chip, tell me, what are your latest thoughts this evening on the current state of the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think Russia trying to go for a double freeze. The first one is they're trying to freeze the people into submission by the continuing deep battle against the energy assets. And that's a key thing because maintenance of civilian morale is of decisive importance in in war. But I think that will be sustained because they absolutely understand in Ukraine that the war aims are that it's existential for their sovereignty as a nation, and the justice of their cause means that they must keep fighting. The second freeze is that Putin, I think, would like to freeze the conflict as it stands at the moment. And from his perspective, the mobilized people in the winter environment might give him a capacity to do that. It's also worth saying, though, that doesn't mean the fighting will stop. The tempo might slacken a bit. But on the 30th of November 1939, the Russo-Finnish War began, and that absolutely was a winter war with ferocious fighting for the next 4 months. So to think that we're just going to have stabilized lines and local Christmas truces on either the sort of the Ukrainian New Year, that's just not going to happen.
Right. So taking those 2 points in turn, Russia wants to wear down the will of the Ukrainian people, just their wish to carry on the fight by making them quite literally freeze, blowing up their infrastructure, their capacity to stay warm in their homes. What can the West do about that? Clearly, one obvious line of defence is to provide them with anti-aircraft capability, and different members of the supporting alliance are doing that. Are they doing enough? And what about the West helping with repairing and keeping that heating infrastructure and other infrastructure going? Because we have, of course, in the West, the capacity to do that.
Yeah, they're both great questions. The answer to the first one is, for example, that Germany currently is going to provide 2,430 generators for warming shelters, because, of course, there's a big infrastructure where people could go when there are these sort of raids. The second one, you're absolutely right, that the regular and sustained blackouts, the best stabilization of the grid is more air defense. Now, about 70 to 80% of the Russian missiles are being shot down. But again, there are variables always in war, and you don't know how big their stockpile is going to be for the future. So, for example, Iran seems to be transferring designs and key components to allow drone production to take place on Russian soil in the next few months. And this is why you should really always be suspicious when people put an end date, as one of the Ukrainian ministers did last week, because there are so many variables in war which is inherently complex that to make straight line linear predictions of what will happen in the future is just something that you can't really do with certainty. You can have a campaign plan, but the other side will try and mess up that campaign plan, and that's always the case in war.
Yes, I mean, you use the example of the winter war, Finland against Russia, when Russia attempted its massive incursion into Finland. Sometimes we see Ukraine now described as a superior fighting force to Russia, not just in terms of morale, but in terms of equipment, obviously with the help of Western friends like this country, like the United States. Is it within the bounds of possibility? Is it within the capacity of the Ukrainian military to deny Russia an opportunity to retrench and slow down in the course of winter? Could Ukraine take the fight to Russia during winter and use the Russian tactics against them?
Yeah, I think they can, because although the winter environment is very harsh and hands and feet are key enablers, as well as the equipment you need to prosecute offensive operations, frozen ground means that you can actually take offensive operations on it. It is not that Rasputitsa we talked about in March about the mud of spring. But because the conditions are so harsh, and we've seen the first snow, for example, the quality of your equipment, your leadership, and your motivation, morale, and your will to win become key enablers here. And I've said before that if we look at this in a Clausewitzian sense, your total means, and I think what was significant this week and got rather lost in the sort of whatever happened across the border in Poland. So your total means, and again, the US this week gave $37.7 billion worth of aid to Ukraine, if you say that Ukraine's defense budget was $6 billion prior to the war, that is really, really significant and will see them through probably quite a long time. So your total means and your strength of will gives you your power resistance. And from my perspective, the power of resistance of the Ukrainians is greater at the moment than the power of resistance of a demoralised, mobilised Russian army.